All right, while we're waiting for others to join us, welcome everyone to our April webinar for ISEE NAC. Quick announcement, we are gathering interest in our mentoring groups right now. If you've participated in the past, it's a really fun opportunity to network with investigators from all stages across the country. It's a really fun opportunity just to meet new people. So please sign up for a mentoring group if you're interested. I'll put the link in the chat, or announcements should have gone out yesterday with the link in your email. So I will add that now, and we hope to see you there. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Aisha.
Right. Hey, everybody. So I was supposed to have a co-moderator today, but it's just me, and that's okay. We've gotten a lot of questions from the trainees asking if we could do a panel on non-academic careers. And so we separated those panels into different sections, including government careers and industry careers. So today we're all about government. And we have three fantastic panelists who have agreed to talk to you all today, including Dr. Melissa Smar from the National Institute of Health, Dr. Katie Taylor from the Department of Defense, and Dr. Mary Schubauer-Berrigan from the World Health Organization. And so what I would like to do now is, in that same order, Dr. Smar, Taylor, and Schubauer-Berrigan, if you would just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how you landed at your current government institution, starting with Dr. Smar.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me. It's a pleasure to be here and chat with you all today. I am Melissa Smar. I am currently a program director for the Disparities and Equity Program in the Center to Reduce Cancer Health Disparities with the National Cancer Institute. Many of you may know me formerly from my role as a program officer with the Division of Extramural Research and Training at the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences. And so that's probably a plug for our future discussion of how you can change positions and institutions once you're in a government organization pretty easily. At least that was my perspective. How did I end up here? I actually kind of always knew I was going to end up in government. When I was getting my doctorate degree, I was already pretty interested in trying to explore what my options would be. And so I had, before I even joined a PhD program, actually, I was a student service contractor for the US EPA. And so I knew a little bit about how research opportunities took place at the federal level. And then after I completed my doctoral program, I went for a postdoctoral position at the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development, which is another one of our NIH institutes. And I loved the work I was doing. I was an actual researcher on the intramural side. I got hired as a research fellow. And then I decided to take what most people would say is the traditional path, was an exploratory path for me, and accept a role as an assistant professor on a tenure track path for the environmental health program at Emory University. And so I explored. And then I wanted to go back to government for various reasons that we'll probably discuss as well. And once I got an opportunity to go back into the government, I went to NIEHS, and then I pivoted again, and here I am at NCI. And so happy to dig more into that once we open up the floor for discussion. I'll turn it over to you, Katie.
Hi, thanks for inviting me to talk. I am Katie Taylor. I work at the U.S. Army Research Institute of Environmental Medicine, and I am kind of my primary roles as a research epidemiologist. I'm kind of in between titles right now. I'm transitioning from being the director of the Soldier Performance Health and Readiness Database, which is a large population level data that we collect on all soldiers, and we've used for research purposes to evaluate kind of occupational risk factors for a number of different health outcomes. And now I'm kind of transitioning over to being the director of environmental and occupational epi at our institute. How did I get here? Well, I did my master's in epidemiology and my doctorate in environmental health at the Harvard T.H. Chan School. And when I was wrapping up my work, I was doing my dissertation work was in traumatic brain injury, and I was really interested in injury research. And it just kind of simultaneously aligned with one of the department chairs here at ISEE, our acronym, who was looking for a postdoc who was interested in evaluating risk factors for injury and other neurological endpoints. So kind of very much aligned with what I was already doing. So I came here as an ORISE postdoctoral fellow, which meant that I was technically not really employed by the institution, but I was working here as a participant is what they call this, but basically a research fellow doing a number of different research projects. And about 2 years in, an opportunity came in for me to come on as a civilian employee for the Army. So I'm not in the Army. I don't work for the Army. I work for the Army, but I'm not in the Army. And so I applied for that position. I know that we might go into more details and actually how that like kind of application process works, but I was what is called a direct hire, which means I didn't have to go through some of the more difficult processes that people have, go through when they're being hired in the government. And now I've been here for about 8.5 years. And I'm also happy to, I don't have a lot of jumping. I've been here since the end of since graduating. So I think my story is a little bit shorter, but I'll pass it off to Mary, and also happy to expand on my position as we get into the discussion more.
All right, thank you so much, Katie. And again, it's really nice to be here. Thank you so much to Aisha and to everyone for inviting me to participate in this. As you can tell, I'm a bit more seasoned perhaps than the other two speakers. I started my career in working in a government lab in 1989 when I had just finished my master's degree at the University of Minnesota in environmental microbiology. So that was a bit of a different background for my master's. But I got very interested in environmental health issues working at an EPA laboratory as a contractor. So I think that's one theme, is that that's often a way into government positions, is through contracting work to kind of support the work of the government. But in that position, I was able to publish a lot and did a lot of primary research. So it was really, it got me thinking that I needed to go on for my PhD, which I then did. And my environmental work made me realize that until human beings were actually affected, the environmental impacts weren't perhaps seen as being serious. So I did a stint at the state of Minnesota where I was looking at persistent organic pollutants, mercury, dioxins, PCBs in fish, and seeing studies of humans. And it was interesting to me that although we were interested in environmental exposures, the studies on which the health effects were based seemed to be coming from occupation. So I became interested in occupational epidemiology and went on for a PhD at the Medical University of South Carolina. And I didn't do occupational epi there, but that was a long-term goal that I had. And I could see at that stage of my career that there was a lot of really active cancer research in particular going on at a federal government institution called NIOSH, the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. So after finishing my PhD and a short stint at another EPA facility in Cincinnati, Ohio, I jumped over to NIOSH and I stayed there for 19 and a half years and really sort of had my major career there, looking at all kinds of health effects, primarily cancer though, from different exposures in the workplace. And so I think that motivation for me of sort of making the leap from concerns about environmental health effects to studying health effects in the workplace was really kind of the foundational switch for me. And then 6 or so years ago, I made another switch, which was to go to the International Agency for Research on Cancer, which is not really a government organization. We are a super governmental organization in the sense that we don't work for any particular government, but we are thought to be sort of quasi-governmental in nature. So IARC is the cancer research arm of WHO. And in my job here, I head up a program called the IARC Monographs Program. So many of you may be familiar with that if you've been doing your research and you learn that something causes cancer. we are kind of the first step to establishing that. We do what's called cancer hazard identification. So I started out here as the senior epidemiologist, and then within a couple of years moved into the head of the program, and now I'm the acting head of the evidence synthesis branch in at IARC. So that's a quick summary of how I got where I am now.
Very different paths here, but it's always interesting to figure out how people got where they are, because I mean, in academia, they pretty much try to train students and postdocs for careers in academia. So I'm wondering now how each of you transitioned out of that academic mindset into the government, and what are some soft skills that you think would be important for trainees and students to learn that can be translated between both academic and government work? Either one of you, whoever wants to start first, if you have some ideas. And was it
guess
an easy transition?
could
I know
start.
Dr. Smart worked in academia for a while, so how did you transition out of
I
that?
did. Yeah, I'll be, I guess I can be transparent since I don't have my background behind me says NCI. No, I'm joking. I honestly, the position that I transitioned to, it was kind of an easy transition for me because it was actually a position that I had applied for before I decided to go into academia. So while I was a postdoc, I had the opportunity to apply for a position that's called a health scientist administrator. And for many of you, when you go to usajobs.gov, or if you ever see something that comes out talking about health scientist administrators, essentially it's just, we are the people who kind of help to plan and program and evaluate. You could even say we direct NIH's funding programs. And so that's for research and as well as training programs. And, our job is to kind of keep a national level of awareness as to what the science is, where it is, what's emerging in science fields, especially for those for biomedical research, and where there may be some gaps and where the science probably needs to go to address various areas where there are these gaps. And so to me, at the time, I was made an offer, and other personal factors came into mind, as well as just trying to figure out some professional development decisions at that time too. And so I turned the offer down. So when I was at Emory and decided that, I had been here for about 3 years, I enjoyed the mentorship. I loved coming up with all these new research ideas, but I didn't have to be the person to actually implement them. I loved finding all these different collaborators and facilitating people to come together and say, this would be a great idea if I took, your skills and my skills and this person's skills. And then once we would go in for these things, I was like, okay, I'm done now. They're going to do it. I don't want to really do this anymore. And so that made me realize I think I have more of an interest in the facilitation of the research and the coordination and of collaboration, but I don't have to be the one sticking to these particular projects. And so soft skills, I was at another event for NIH and as an assistant professor, and someone that worked at NIH, I said, they're going to kill me if I tell you this because you're doing so well at Emory. But if you ever want to come to government, there's going to be some job openings soon. You should check out usajobs.gov. And I was like, thanks for that, actually. And I saw the position was up there, and I was like, okay, let me go ahead and put my application in. The soft skills I think that translated was that I'm a talker. I love communicating. I love mentoring. I love communicating about science. In academia, I was often communicating about my own research. As a health scientist administrator, I'm communicating about the research of others. I'm giving, spotlight to the wonderful work that others are doing in a field that I kind of help to support the science for. I'm, pulling people together for workshops so they can communicate about their work and create new collaborations. I'm networking. I'm constantly networking. I feel like even if I'm out at lunch and I run into somebody, I overhear them saying, "Oh, I don't know about this." I'm like, "Oh, let me give you my card. You should call me. Did you know you could talk to a program director and we'll help you figure out X, Y, and Z?" They're looking at me like, who is this strange lady? But I'm just constantly networking. And so I think that was another soft skill that translated. And one thing I will be transparent about was, something that's really big to me is interpersonal relationships. Again, like I said, I love to be uh in relation with people and collaborating. And I kind of struggled with that a little bit as an assistant professor. I was kind of one of the youngest people in my department. I was doing an area that most people in my department didn't focus on. And so sometimes I felt a little bit isolated. I felt like there wasn't that often daily opportunity to engage and interact in a way that I was missing. And so making that transition to government has given me that opportunity to kind of fulfill all the pieces I think that make, me being in science interesting. So that was my transition.
So I can say a couple things, and from what I understand of Katie's background, I think we had a kind of similar experience because we're both working as scientists and researchers within a government setting. So we were, I mean, for myself at least, very much involved in the primary research as well. So it's in a way similar to academia because you're publishing, you're presenting your work, you're developing collaborations and carrying out the research. What's different often though is that you're not necessarily setting the priorities of what your particular group is going to be working on. So that is a difference. You really have to be passionate and committed to the mission of whatever organization you end up in. And for me, that was a perfect fit at NIOSH because I could examine a very wide range of different exposures. But of course, they had to be in the workplace. I wasn't free to go out and just study anything in any population that I wanted to. For myself, I didn't really ever have a strong desire to go to academia. I saw maybe the downsides of it, the constant chasing grant money. We're so happy that we have people like Melissa to go to help guide what is the next wave of the research. But you do still have to compete for funding. It's just a little bit different. You're doing it in the setting of your agency and their priorities and sometimes what Congress wants, or here at WHO, where we're determined by at IARC, where our mission is determined by our participating states. So we have 27 different governments that tell us what they think our priorities should be. So you do have to fit in within that structure. But I have found actually that as a researcher, I'm able to exhibit a lot of creativity and take on projects that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't been there, which is really, that's kind of an amazing feeling that you've been able to do that kind of research. The last thing I would say is you have an incredible opportunity to have impact on direct policy, which is a really amazing thing that you don't necessarily have in academia. And I'll stop there and let Katie take over.
I was actually going to say very similar things. I think we do have some overlap. When I took on my position, or I jumped into the postdoc that I was doing, part of the reason that I wanted, or I was interested in doing a postdoc here, was I felt that it didn't truly, I wasn't 100% sure actually about whether or not I wanted to go into academia, or if I wanted to go to government, or I wanted to go to industry. And so I saw this particular postdoc as like the hybrid. So it, I do work for the Army. We have stakeholders like you might have similarly to what you would have in industry. So there are some things that are kind of driving what research is wanted or warranted at the time. It doesn't mean that you don't have flexibility. It's just you have to kind of work within the system and what are the priorities at that time. But I think particularly what Mary said is I do have access to the policymakers. And a lot of times the reason that we're even doing the research is to drive policy changes, and you have access to people who are, higher up the chain, who want to understand, what a specific exposure looks like in the military right now, and how that impacts health outcomes that they're interested in. So that is, something that I didn't necessarily have access to in academia in the same way. But again, there is kind of some constraints on what you can and can't do. I think that all of us have kind of figured out our ways to like make sure that we can still do what we want to do and tie it into the overarching big picture. So you kind of do the big thing and then tie in your like other interests that really like kind of drives what you're interested in. So it's not like you're 100% like told what you have to do and this is the research. There is still that flexibility, and yes, the like funding sources are different. But when I was first coming into this position, I actually did talk to some other people in academia and other just kind of get a feel for like, was this a good step for myself? And one thing that someone told me was to kind of, if academia is like still something that you're interested in, you should always kind of keep like one foot in the academic door. And so for me, what that means is that I still collaborate with people that are at different academic institutions. We have grants, and I can do like external grants where I'm allowed to kind of partner up with other places. So for them, it gives them access to an occupational cohort that is very well established. It's huge. We can do a lot of different types of studies here. And for me, it kind of allows me to have that networking and that academic rigor that I kind of miss being, kind of in my institution. So I think that that's kind of been my approach to this position specifically.
I mean, well, all of you are in government jobs now, and we heard that Dr. Smart has people just walking up offering her jobs at the government when she was working in academia. But as somebody who applied for a lot of federal positions through USA Jobs and just never got a call back or anything like that, I hear that a lot from students and trainees. So we'd like to hear, how do you even get a job where you all work, aside from, again, having somebody walk up and tell you that you need to apply for a job that they're about to post on USA Jobs? What's the pipeline for those kinds of positions at your institution?
I can jump in first. I think that, like, at least for us, a lot of the people that we hire come in off of fellowships that are external to, so for example, we have ORISE fellowships. So they would be at that, those types of positions would actually be advertised on the ORISE website. And I can send that out to you guys if you're interested in it. But it's not just, there's often positions for a lot of different federal institutions. It's run by the Department of Energy, I think. So I don't know why, but but we all kind of take advantage of the fact that we can get these ORISE fellows to come in, and that's how I got started. And once I was in the institution, this is where I think probably Mary might be able to chime into this about the USA Jobs website. A lot of times those positions are created with someone already in mind. And so, in order to even get your kind of face in front of them, you might have to come in as a fellow or some other mechanism. And ORISE is one way, but we also, Henry Jackson fellows, there's Geneva fellows, there's all these people that partner up with government institutions that provide kind of like contracting type fellowships that always have like positions that they're advertising. So I think it's just knowing what, that those things exist and that there are kind of roundabout ways to get into federal employment that way.
Yeah, I could add to that. And maybe my experience is a bit outdated because I've been away for 6 years from the US government. I actually was one of those people that just put in my application for a NIOSH job and got the job. So it's a bit rare because they don't post a lot of them cold like this, but in this case they did. So yeah, Katie's right that starting to get a foot in the door as a fellow is a great idea. But I don't think you have to necessarily always go through one of these systems either. When I was at
Well, how does
NIOSH, we
it
had
work for WHO? Does it work the same way?
it's a little different for WHO. And we've hired a lot of people since I've been at IARC, and I must say every person I have hired has been unknown to me and found them through the WHO job service. So it really isn't necessarily, in my case at least, who you know. It's the person, whether they fit the job that's posted. And what I can say is if you're interested in a position in WHO, we have something like USA Jobs. It's called Stellis, STLLIS. And if you go to who.int/careers, you will see all kinds of information about how to do it. Now that said, the jobs are, there are hundreds of people who apply for any one job, but often they're not a great fit for it. So if you see a position that you think, hey, I am extremely qualified for this position, I think you can apply for it and actually stand a pretty good chance of getting through the process and getting an interview. So I encourage people to do it. And you can also get on sort of the roster and then just turn in your application when you see you do have to monitor and look for positions. But I will say one tip I would have is networking is always a great piece of advice. And I think getting to know some of the programs that do, if you're interested in research at one of the big federal organizations like EPA or NIOSH or NCI or NIEHS, getting to know the scientists there and then asking them about what opportunities there are. Because we had a program at NIOSH called the Title 42 Fellowship Program. And they would be advertised on an irregular basis, but if people look out for them, they can apply for these fellowships, work for a year or two, and then perhaps compete for a full-time, a more permanent job. So I think getting to know the people, the programs that you're interested in is a really good step to take.
I guess I would just add that for the like USA jobs.gov, I mean, I remember applying multiple times and not hearing anything back and not understanding why I wasn't a good fit or not getting any feedback. But one thing I also learned is that, with our system, it's algorithm based too. And so you have to be a good fit. But sometimes you're a good fit, but you just are not marketing yourself well for the positions. And so knowing someone and not knowing them, but like Mary was saying, researching and finding people to reach out to say, I may be interested. If anything comes available, please let me know, when it's posted. But then also being able to say, hey, I did apply for this position. Here's a copy of my CV for the hiring manager, because for many of them, the hiring managers are listed on that actual posting, because sometimes it happens where for whatever reason you were a good fit, but perhaps you didn't market yourself well. So they can tell you like, oh, you did have all the right experience. You just kind of didn't frame it correctly or something. And so don't worry, these are positions that come around every X amount of, frequency. And so revise it and resubmit, or they can pull it and say, go to HR and say, this was a really great candidate. Somehow I don't know how they, didn't, can we reevaluate? And so it's not that you have to like know a person closely, but that networking skill, I will go back and say, like what Mary said, being willing to put yourself out there and reach out to people to say, I'm interested, let me know if something comes along. But also I would echo Katie as well, NIH specifically, NIH is really 27 institutes and centers. So, and each one has their own individual opportunities that they kind of highlight or showcase for training programs, summer internship programs. But then there's also some that are a bridge across all of the ISEEs and centers. So if you're a person who's not entirely sure, do I want to go to NCI? Do I want to go to NIEHS? Do I want to be at NICHD? There are the larger programs like the summer intern program, which is our internship program, SIP, and others where you get an opportunity to apply for the overall program, but then you have an opportunity to interview and meet with different institutes to figure out where you would be a good fit. And so I will also place in the chat, if I have access to it, just a list of some of the links that people can check out to better understand those programs. And then of course, some of the specific programs that we have, like at NCI, we have our iCure, which is intramural, if you want to do intramural research, continuing umbrella of research experience, or just the continuing umbrella of research experience if you want to do extramural research, so or activity. So again, reach out to people like me. I'm a program director. It is my job, and I actually love it to have people say, I don't know you probably don't have time for me, but can you tell me how to get a job here? I love those emails. Actually, that's just like the best part of my day. So yeah.
Well, thank you all so much. Going back to something that each of you mentioned briefly during various periods in the panel, I wanted to see if we could discuss just a little bit, depending on how transparent you would like to be, the pros and the cons of government work. I know everybody thinks that academia is hard, and it is, because maintaining 80 to 90% of my salary in grants is not a good time. But we like to hear about how the pros of government might outweigh academia. or, you know, some things that you might miss about academia that might be cons in the government. So pros and cons, please, in whichever order you would like to go in. And don't be scared, even though this is being recorded, but we know that you like where you work. It's okay.
I can jump in. I'll take the first leap, I guess. So there are many pros to working for the government. I think one of the things that, and Aisha kind of brought it up, funding is just a lot easier to come by in the government. We're not, you know, we have internal funding, which is funding that's specifically allotted to our institution by the government. So we know we're going to get funding for research regardless. And then after that, we do have to, you know, kind of compete internally for that funding. But in some ways, we kind of work together to make sure that we're meeting kind of the needs, for me, you know, the needs of the Army, like for their occupational health. And so we're all kind of working together to make sure that that money is allotted and spent in a way that allows us to kind of all do what we need to do to accomplish the mission that we've been tasked to do. And so it's a little bit less, you know, unknown, I guess. You definitely do. There are people that get their projects turned down, so it's not that you won't not get funded, but I think that there is kind of this like, okay, if we didn't get you funded this way, let's try this other route. And for the most part, people do tend to get their projects picked up. You know, I have also worked in the external system to get funded externally outside of our institution, and that is similarly competitive, I guess, and to what you guys are probably seeing in academia. But like in some cases, for example, there's like congressionally mandated funding pools that we can apply for that's external, like schools can apply for, everyone can apply for, academics can apply for. But they might be very interested in like something specific to the military. So I think we almost have a little bit of a better or an easier time competing for that funding, even though it's more competitive because we have access to the military populations that they're interested in. So I think funding, you know, alone is something very, you know, if that's something that's concerning to you, that's definitely easier. But I think as both Mary and myself have said, there is limitations to what we can apply for. So there's a lot of like research that might be of interest or something that you think might be, you know, like bridge the gap between like something that you're interested in doing in the future and something that you've done in the past. But the like government or whoever you're working for might not be as interested in those kind of like gap filling sciences. They want like actionable items that can result in policy changes or can reduce injury. So you kind of don't get those types of that freedom to always do the science that you want to do. And I think that there is I think I'll say what I miss the most about academia is in my institution, we have like a bunch of specialists, but we don't have these like huge labs, or we don't like run deep in the same way that academics. So you don't have a lot of the same like scientific rigor and feedback that you get in academia. I kind of miss that like lab environment. I'm, you know, creating my own lab, I guess, and trying to recreate that. But when I started, like specifically in my position, there really wasn't anybody like me, because they were like, oh, the person that did your job, she's gone now, so now you do that job. And that was it. I was the person that took over that position. So I didn't have, you know, in the same way that you would have in academia, where you have like a bunch of different mentors that you can reach out to. It's a little bit different environment. There is almost a business aspect to the research that we're doing and what they expect of you. So I do miss kind of just the academic environment, and that kind of is, to me, was a little bit of a con. But I'm still here, 8.5 years, so stuck it out.
I guess I could say, I guess a pro would be, in addition to everything Katie said, I think I kind of touched on it a little bit. As you can tell, I I pivot a lot. And so I have found it to be easy to kind of go from one federal agency to another, or even one institute to another once. And every time I start a new position, I get to have all that federal time still count towards my, retirement and career, service time and things. And so it's not like I'm starting from scratch completely. But I also feel like I I was just telling, I think, Jesse before we started, that I was pleasantly surprised to find out that even I was somebody who walked away from research. I was an intramural researcher for a federal agency, and then I went to the extramural side. And I was like, okay, so once you're an extramural, it's gonna get boring. What else can you do? But when I was at NIEHS, I was managing multiple programs, had a lot of broad um, um depth, or I guess more breadth of knowledge of various programs and outcomes, and so that was great. But now, in this new role as a program director, I'm doing a lot more of the facilitation and having a lot of that opportunity to look at things from the bigger picture and move and where the science needs to move. And so there is some, I say that to say there's some diversity and variety, and depending on what position you want to be in. And so if you're finding yourself getting in a rut or you want to explore something new, you don't have to think just because you're in federal government, there's no room to explore something new. There's also the opportunity to do details. I've been on detail for a while with the Department of Health and Human Services, their Office of Environmental Justice. That put me in the room with people like our Assistant Secretary for Health, Rear Admiral Levine, where I'm getting to present to someone in uniform who has a lot of authority about, initiatives that we could do to put money in the hands of community-based organizations to support environmental justice. And so who would have thought that I would have that opportunity, or to learn, like Katie mentioned earlier, how to bring information back to my home institute as to what are the goals that HHS is looking for in terms of addressing health disparities and environmental justice, and how do I use that to encourage our awardees to start doing more of the research that will inform policy. I think I heard Katie mention that earlier about, like, we do research that kind of ties to policy, or so this is another way to kind of take and learn another skill set and apply it to a very specific role that I have. One con I can say, though, is that I'm in meetings all the time. I don't know. I don't feel like I don't get my work done during my regular work duty unless I figure out some days where I have to be better with my time management and say, all right, I was in back-to-back meetings Monday and Wednesday, then, Tuesday and Thursday, I'm going to carve out time to actually do the work and get some things done. Because if you don't do that with your time management, then you'll find yourself kind of drowning because you are in a lot of meetings. And depending on if you're an introvert or extrovert, maybe it could be a pro or a con, that the type of meetings that you're in can change. So at 9 o'clock, I'm in a meeting with a community-based organization looking for funding opportunities. But by 10 o'clock, I'm talking to the interim director of the Office of Environmental Justice about priorities and from the stakeholder level of the federal government. And then by 11 o'clock, I'm now talking to a specific grantee for a program, trying to get them back on track because they've had some challenges. Like, your brain is shifting from one perspective to another. And for me, I love it. I have colleagues who are like, yeah, no, like, this is a bit much. We need to figure out how to organize our day a little bit better, where I'm doing all of, these types of meetings on this day or and this on another. And so, but they have that flexibility to do that. So it could be a pro or a con, I would say. But yeah, those would be the only things I would add on.
You're muted, Mary.
I
There we
agree
go.
with Katie and Melissa's comments. And the only thing I can really add is that obviously when you're in government, you are somewhat constrained by political processes. There's just no doubt about it that can have an influence on your work and continuity of your work and that sort of thing. So that's a definite con. I think one pro that hasn't yet been mentioned is just the ability to have access to things that you couldn't as an academic. So one example from NIOSH is that Congress wrote into their founding documents of NIOSH that NIOSH has right of entry to go into any business in the US and conduct health research. It's the only organization in the US and maybe even in the world that has that ability. So you're able to do things that nobody else can do when you're working for certain organizations. And I think WHO is also like that to a large extent. At IHARC, we're a bit different. We're a unique arm of WHO because our primary mission is research. So you'll see that there are lots of opportunities for students, for trainees, and for scientists here who want to get involved in epidemiological research in particular. So it's a bit different than Geneva and WHO. It's a bit more like academia, whereas much of the funding comes in from grant money, but there are also opportunities to do research that affect policy as well, which is really nice.
Oh, thank you. I forgot to mention at the beginning of this seminar that any students who have questions are welcome to put those in the chat, or you can save them up, because after this next question, you'll have the opportunity to unmute and ask any questions that you would like to ask. But my last question for you all is, if you would tell me about your ongoing programs, projects, partnerships, and how students or trainees could potentially get involved in some of the work that you're doing, if that's an opportunity. So what are you working on, Katie? I know you're always coming back and forth to DC. What are you working on?
Yeah, so I have a number of projects. A lot of my earlier work here primarily focused on kind of injury prevention research. And so I was working on, I think the big project that I was working on for a while with the Pentagon was reevaluating how they assess body composition and fitness in the military, with specific ties to understanding how those factors may increase or decrease your risk of injury. And so we set out and collected data on around 2,000 soldiers, was a representative sample, kind of strategically sampled people all over the United States and from the Army to get a better idea of what body composition, and then as well as fitness factors look like in our current military. And our goal was kind of to better incorporate, currently right now the Army separates those two factors, and we thought, well, maybe we don't necessarily care about your body composition if your fitness is very high and you're operating in your job at a very high level. So we were able to show that, and so that resulted in 2 huge policy changes very recently. That is not necessarily my primary focus. It was something that I was tasked to do, so I did it. But I also work a lot, like as I mentioned before, I was the director of the Soldier Performance Health and Readiness Database. It's basically comprised of all this data. The Army collects so much data on their soldiers, and so it's like administrative, medical, performance records, and we took all that data, kind of pushed it together, merged it, and now we use it to evaluate many different health outcomes, but my focus has been kind of on return to duty guidance for soldiers who are injured, and understanding what treatment plans work the best, which, how much duty time should they have off to best protect them from getting a future injury? How do we maintain performance levels in that context? So we also know that if your fitness is dropping while you're off duty, and then we push you back into making you operate at the level that you were operating before, that puts you at a higher risk of injury. We've been looking at women who are postpartum, because there were initially the regulations in the Army where you had 6 months to get back to where you needed to be as far as like performance standards go. And what we found was that actually was not great for them. So they changed the regulations recently to expand that to a year. But even then, we're kind of reevaluating that to look at, does delivery style or like delivery, how you delivered matter? So, and we're finding that it does, and that some people might need a little bit more time to recover. And so we're trying to build those things into policy to, protect our service members. more recent kind of research that I've been jumping into is when I first came here, I'm at the U.S. Army Research Institute of Environmental Medicine, but nobody does environmental research here. And so it's mostly been like, if we do environmental research, it's been in the thermal and altitude type environmental exposures, but not anything kind of ambient or things that, we know soldiers are exposed to. So I have been working with Harvard and with Purdue to develop a device to evaluate heavy metals exposures in our soldiers. And we kind of just did a first pilot study to evaluate that just at our institution. And surprise, surprise, I mean, I think we all know this, but we found elevated lead levels in our service members. And so the next steps now are to take this out and kind of do a wider assessment, as well as to have a better understanding of what the risk factors might be for these types of exposures. The big thing for our service members is lead is the big metal that kind of comes up, and everyone says we know it's a problem, but they're exposed to other metals that we just don't even evaluate. For example, tungsten is a metal that people are exposed to in the military, and there's just not a ton of research on it because you don't see it outside of the military. It's in ammunition and then in scientific settings, but really that level of exposure is not the same as someone being exposed to volatilized, the volatilization process that happens when you're firing ammunition. So that's kind of, I'm developing that line of research right now. I'm working with a bunch of people. I think we're all very excited about the kind of opportunity. And I think the institution is also hoping to kind of create a space for this type of research. So I am moving in that direction and have a couple upcoming grants, hopefully that will get picked up, and we'll be able to move forward with that. As far as coming here, there's a couple ways. Like I said, there is kind of fellowships that are always being posted on the ORISE fellowship. I'll post the link to that too on the chat after this. But one of the other opportunities, we work with students all the time. We have data. We have tons of data. And I think that as when you're in academia, that's, the thing that you want. You need to be able to do your research and have access to data, whether that's you're collecting it or there's existing data. But we are, always willing to partner up with people that need thesis work or dissertation. They're looking to do something for their dissertation. We can't guarantee anything, but there's definitely, if it's something of interest, I'm looking for people to run analyses and stuff like that. So it's a mutually beneficial relationship to be able to, allow you to have access to the data so that you can run analyses, but also to get out some of the research that we think is important. So there's definitely that option. And then we do actually do postings through USA Jobs as well. So I would look for those positions when they come up. And often when we're doing that, because a lot of people here get a direct hire, which means we don't really go down the USA Jobs route. But I think that if it is posted, it is open to the general. And I will say that very similar to what Mary said, oftentimes when we get the applications for those fields, there are a lot of people that just apply because it's a government job, but they will not even be have any of the remote qualifications that we're looking for. So there is actually a much smaller pool that you're competing in. So don't be intimidated if you see on LinkedIn that 100 people have already applied for this position or marked that they have applied for this position. I will say that pool is probably likely smaller of who's you're competing against for those positions. And I'll pass it on.
So one question from Alexandra in line with what you were saying was that as a current graduate student, is that one of the suggestions maybe for things that they can do to increase their chances of getting a job at one of your institutions before graduating or recently graduating from school or applying for postdocs? Do you think potentially getting involved in your projects through their dissertation or thesis might assist? Or are there other ways that you think, or other things that you think they can do to increase their chances? I've heard, this is just what I've heard from other people, that using terms from the job announcement in your application helps with the algorithm. If you use the actual words in your application. Are there any other suggestions?
I think that that's definitely true. There is definitely someone that's screening, whether it's AI or there are like even the government has like their own HR people. So you have your position, you post it, and then someone will screen it or something electronically will screen it and kind of feed what are the applications that kind of meet the qualifications based off of the pre-screening. We have in the past sometimes actually asked them to send us all of them. And we're like, we don't want you to do the screening because sometimes we can interpret things like, they might not write. I think Melissa kind of got at this, like, you might not write or be able to describe what you do in the detail that would get the screening to understand that what you said actually does qualify you for a descriptive thing that pops up. And so sometimes like we'll get them and we have hired someone that didn't get initially screened because of that. Like we looked at it, was like, oh, this person actually meets all the qualifications. It just was written in a way that didn't get it flagged. So but I do think that it is, that's kind of few and far between. And Melissa probably can speak to this more, but definitely speaking to the position itself, making sure that you have an application that is specific to the position you're applying to. Like the generic applications might not get, if you're just using the same thing over and over and just kind of mass blanketing to different institutions, it might not be sufficient to kind of get past those initial screenings.
Agreed.
Well,
And we're still
uh,
scientists too. I would say, look, all of you are brilliant scientists. So the same things that, help increase your chance of getting an academic position, those things are also still looked for in government researchers, continue to publish, continue to go to conferences and present, because we see that you have those communication skills, those networking skills. I think it sometimes there's like, maybe I've heard people feel like, oh, if you're in the government, then you're not doing research. That's not true. You still have to be a really, really great scientist and have the information. Like, I know it's weird. I am an environmental and reproductive epidemiologist. So, and it's like, well, you're not doing epidemiology, but I'm working with epidemiologists and helping them to problem solve. And I wouldn't be able to do that if I didn't have the training and also the experience of doing some of that myself. So everything Katie said is correct, but also just don't forget about the core things that you would do even if you were trying to get a job in academia, which is, making sure you have the way of marketing yourself and building that competitive CV as well.
So in line with that, we have another question and then a piggyback off of that question that asks, what does the job training look like for each of the institutions, or alternatively, does a successful applicant already have the skills and strengths necessary to carry out a job that they're applying for? For instance, at IARC, would you consider applicants who haven't specifically researched cancer before?
Yeah, that's a great question. And in fact, we have hired people for positions who don't have cancer research specifically. And I can give an example. I won't name names, but someone who had a background in cardiovascular disease epidemiology from air pollution studies. And so she was hired for a position that was related to cancer, and it worked out very well. So I think don't hesitate to apply. If you can make a case that your skill set is going to transfer to a new disease outcome or a new exposure setting, you should go for it and make the case in your own mind first, and then make it on paper to the recruiters or in the application. Explaining it in your cover letter is really important. This is your opportunity to, don't make it generic, really show that you've done the homework to understand why this particular job is the perfect fit for you.
All
And
right,
I would just say, I don't have a background in cancer, by the way. And I'm a program director for the Cancer Institute. And everyone, when I told them I was going to NCI, they were like, you don't do cancer research. And I said, no, but I've been trained in reproductive epidemiology. And there are a lot of hormone related cancers that are still impacted by environmental exposures. Their environmental justice is still relevant for cancer outcomes. And I do have the epi training and the reproductive health training. And so when I gave my job talk, I was very transparent. I put it right in their face. As you know, you can see my background. I do not have a cancer background, but here's what I do know. And here's the connections I see based off of my training and where the field is going. And so please don't let that limit you, to trying to apply for something if you really feel like you're a good fit for that position, just because you don't have that specific background, I would say, in cancer or whatever the area may be.
I'll
Oh,
sorry, I'll chime in too. I just put in the link for the ORISE fellowship, but that is kind of, you know, coming in, it is supposed to be kind of a learning opportunity, and that's what's tied to it. And so when I was coming in, part of that fellowship comes with a learning fund. You get like a small stipend for additional coursework or additional training that you might need to take. So, you know, like my research assistants and postdoctoral fellows, if they've asked me that they want some additional training in an area, that's what that money is kind of allotted for. So it does allow for on-site training. And then I'll just say that I had no idea what I was jumping into when I was, jumping into working for the Army and the military. I couldn't tell you what a rank was. I couldn't tell you what was higher than the other. And then you're thrown into an environment where everyone's calling you ma'am, and it was very overwhelming for me. But I think that eventually, like just even in this environment, they kind of ramp you up pretty quickly, kind of teach you the ins and outs. So there are definitely people here, I will say, that kind of helped get me situated, even though my background wasn't in kind of military medicine or military health. I was an occupational health researcher though. And so what I was bringing to the table was something that they wanted to. So I think in a lot of ways, like wherever you're going to go, you're never going to be like the perfect, like I come in with all the experience, and especially when you're coming straight out of grad school, that part of that is they understand where you're at, and they're going to kind of hopefully help you get to where you need to be able to operate, because they want your success, because your success is their success as well. So
Can I mention one other program before we break in the next minute? The Epidemic Intelligence Service. I don't know if that comes up a lot in your discussions, but that, even though it's geared towards MDs, it also, NIOSH is part of CDC, and we've hired PhD level sort of environmental occupational epidemiologists. There are positions at NIOSH, at NCEH, that would be perfect for people with an environmental epi background. So don't hesitate to look at that. It's a great way to get a foot in the door at CDC and all of the subsequent organizations within CDC.
perfect. Well, I think that that is a great way to end this fantastic panel that we've had today. And I want to thank each of you for agreeing to come and chat with us. I'm sure the students and the trainees appreciate it, and we definitely appreciate all of the wonderful links and resources that you've provided in the chat. We will save those somewhere. Jesse or Sheree will save them somewhere because I don't have access to the Zoom stuff. Sheree says yes. Okay, and then we'll share them with everybody. So thank you again for coming to talk with us today, and we greatly appreciate it. And I hope that everybody learned something and that you all have a fantastic rest of the week.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks for
you.
having me.
Thank you all
Bye-bye.
so much.
Bye.